Good morning, everyone. Welcome today, and thank you for joining us on our webinar, How to Get Approvals on Hard-to-Place Cases in 2025. Obviously, this will apply to 2026 as well. And we're really glad you're here because underwriting is changing very quickly, faster than most agents realize. And, the cases that used to be easy approvals are suddenly getting flagged, postponed, or outright declined. So today we are going to learn exactly what has changed. We're going to take a look at how to work with the new underwriting rules that are out there instead of fighting them. Learning how to get ahead of some of these issues instead of fighting them on the back end can make a big difference in placing these more difficult cases. And most importantly, we are going to see how we can get approvals on cases that other agents will just walk away from. Again, just getting ahead of those problems instead of trying to fix them and run interference at the end is going to make a big difference in our business and in dealing with our clients. And if you can stick around to the end, we'll go over some real cases and show how we've placed some of the more difficult ones this year that could have been declines, but we found a way to get those through. So first, we're going to take a look at what big changes we saw in 2025. I should preface this by saying it's not just been 2025. Obviously, this has been going on for a while, but we saw, I think, our biggest increases in all the automation and instant decision type models in 2025. So the first major change that we have seen is going to be the rise of data-driven decisions. Underwriting today is very data first. Before any human ever looks at a file, most of our carriers are running predictive scores based on prescription histories, MVR reports, their motor vehicle records, MIB codes, and even consumer data. There's a lot of consumer data out there that is being pulled that's looked at. Some things obviously cannot be taken into consideration due to privacy laws, but that is one of the first things that's happening when you submit an application. Before any live person takes a look at these files, they're being pushed through a system and these predictive scores and modeling is taking place. And the result is that declines are happening before anyone even reads the applicant's story. And you and I, we both know that the application does not always tell the full story. So if we don't really pre-qualify that data profile, that carrier system is going to make the decision for us. And oftentimes it's not going to be in our favor. So knowing that full story and being able to convey that completely and not just with facts on an app can make all the difference in the world, which is where having a good cover letter can really come in handy. And if this is a situation where a cover letter is not appropriate, oftentimes there are sections in the application where you can put notes. And so any extra details that can be provided in the notes section are always recommended if you're able to. All right, what else has changed? Well, the carriers are tightening up on some key impairments. We're seeing carriers that tighten up on things such as mental health cases, serious cardiac histories, substance and alcohol notes in the records, and high BMIs. Sleep apnea with non-compliance, recent hospitalizations, and certain medications are also tripping these automatic declines. So, something that we've seen in the past that may have gone right through the system because we answered a question on an app and they got the records. Those may have gone through on a fully underwritten basis, but when we're looking at things like instant decisions, a lot of times those will be an instant decline if there has been a recent hospitalization or any reference to substance or alcohol notes in the background. Those systems will automatically decline these and kick them out. And they don't always tell you that coverage might have been possible if we'd just gone with a fully underwritten option instead. So sometimes it's not necessarily the impairments and the client that are always going to be a decline. That's not the issue. The real issue is the way in which we submitted the app, that if we've submitted instant decision over fully underwritten. So that method can make a big difference. And so reaching out in advance, finding out if it's going to make it through an automated process or an instant decision model can be key to avoiding those declines, because we may not want to go fully underwritten right off the bat. And that can make all the difference in avoiding those declines. We are also seeing areas where carriers have become a little more lenient. So the good news is, while they have tightened up in some areas, especially on the instant decision models, they've loosened up in other areas. We are seeing well-controlled diabetes getting better offers than ever. What may have been a table 4 in the past for insulin use, as an example, we might be able to see table 2 on that now, especially if this is type 2 diabetes. So as long as it's well controlled, that A1C is under control and well managed, blood sugars are well managed, there's been no neuropathy, no other diabetic complications, we're seeing very favorable offers there. Marijuana is being treated more like alcohol for a lot of carriers. There was a time where it was an instant decline, then there was a time where it was almost always tobacco rates. We are seeing a lot of non-tobacco rates depending on the form of use, the amount of use. So that is an area that has become much, much easier to insure in recent years. And then build charts. Some of these have softened just enough so that clients who were previously around that table 2 are getting closer to standard. We're also seeing that with some of the table shave type programs and crediting programs where those can be improved upon. So that's one area that we're seeing things get a little bit more lenient, especially I would say on the fully underwritten side, not as much on the automated side, but on that fully underwritten side for sure. And the big takeaway here is that approvals today are going to go to the agents who gather that information up front before that application ever goes in. Stay ahead of that data, find out what you can on the client. The more you know, then the easier it will be for us to determine together which method of submission is going to be the most appropriate for your client. But getting ahead of this is going to make the difference between winning cases and losing them altogether or having them go to another agent. And we obviously don't want to see that happen. So what are some of the top hard to place client categories that we're seeing right now? Number 1 is going to be a high BMI or build issues. Believe it or not, a high BMI or body mass index is still the number 1 reason for substandard offers and declines. But what matters most is not really just the height and the weight. It's what comes with the build. A lot of times with a higher BMI, we do see comorbidities such as sleep apnea, blood pressure and cholesterol issues. A diabetes risk obviously is going to be increased. So if you know the comorbidities up front, it's going to be a lot easier to match the client to the right carrier. If you just know that your client has a high BMI and you try to find the carrier that's going to be the best fit based on their build, that may seem quick and easy in the beginning, but if they have any of these comorbidities, we're going to want to really dig into those as well, because what's good with one carrier may be bad with another. And just because the build chart was better for carrier A doesn't mean that those comorbidities are going to be better with carrier A. So again, the more we know, the more questions you ask, and the more we can dig into that client's profile and find the right carrier, the more likely we are to be successful in placing that case if we set the expectation correctly right up front. All right, the next one that has become a kind of hard to place category is going to be our mental health cases. This is a huge area where agents get blindsided. Obviously, mental health is not something that you can just see by looking at a client. People don't walk around with a t-shirt on that say, hey, I have mental health issues. So, this is, while it's touchy subject for some people, these are things you need to know about your client before submitting that application. And honestly, something to always keep in mind is that underwriters, they care less about that diagnosis than they do about the patterns and the treatment and the follow-ups. Yes, they're going to look at the actual diagnosis. Yes, they're going to look at the medications, but what really is going to matter to them is the types of medications, how long they've been stable on a specific medication, if there have been dosage increases, if there have been gaps in therapy. um, have there been hospitalizations? Has there been missed work? Has there been missed school? They're they want to see that whole big picture. So a lot of times when we're looking at mental health cases, especially if they're very involved and in depth, multiple medications, such, yeah, those are not necessarily going to be your best case for instant decision or automated underwriting. These are the kind of cases that, because they can be very subjective, are going to usually be better off fully underwritten, where a human is actually going to look at this. A human can actually order the medical records, see the patterns, see the therapy notes, see that there's consistency in their visits and their follow-ups, that there haven't been multiple med changes. And so this is a prime example of knowing which submission method is going to be the most favorable for the client. I know a lot of clients want instant decision or automation. They want to stay away from the long, fully underwritten process. But at the end of the day, oftentimes, especially on mental health cases, the fully underwritten is going to be more favorable in the long run for that client. Another really hard to place category that we've seen in the past few years has been substance and alcohol abuse histories. Um, Carriers are focusing very heavily on substance use and abuse, especially alcohol. And I would venture to say, especially since COVID, that was something that we saw a huge increase in alcohol use risk during COVID while people were home. They were bored, they were lonely, they were scared, whatever the reason may be. They were hopping on Zoom calls with a glass of wine in the afternoon. Um, and so we saw a huge increase in stay at home lonely drinking. And with that being the case, it has increased the way that underwriters scrutinize this. So when they see notes in an APS like social drinker, that's not necessarily a huge red flag. But if they start to see notes regarding daily use, um, or binge drinking, obviously this can lead to rate ups. And if they see these kind of notations in some of those background reports, it will oftentimes lead to them wanting to see an APS to make sure there's no negative comments from the doctor regarding any alcohol use. Um, Marijuana is another one. Obviously, we see on a lot of these reports. As I said before, it's not as big of a deal anymore. But they do look at how that is combined with alcohol use or any other polydrug use. If there's any other drug use history, then marijuana does become a big deal. Um, by itself, they see it as pretty harmless, but when they start seeing it mixed with other things, then it becomes a bigger deal. And again, something to keep in mind is they're also going to look very differently at marijuana smoking versus vaping versus edibles, and the reason it's being taken. If it's just socially and recreationally, that's going to be viewed differently than if it's medicinal or for some specific purpose, such as pain or sleeping. Um, but this is a very good example of something that I would recommend shopping in advance. If you've got a client that has one of these histories, we can find the best carrier for that situation. And it is going to vary significantly by carrier. Each of the carriers views it very differently. They all have different guidelines that they follow with the reinsurers, and some have proprietary guidelines. And so I always recommend shopping these out because no two carriers are going to be alike. And then something that also to keep in mind is anyone with a recent DUI is always going to require careful placement. Some carriers are going to decline that if it's been in the last year. Others will be willing to look at it with a high flat extra. But again, this is an area that I would definitely shop so that we make sure that we find that first appropriate home the first time. Another harder to place category that we've run into, or that we've always run into, this one's not new, but cardiac impairments. But something a lot of agents don't know is that almost any cardiac impairment can be insured. I say almost because there are times it can't. However, I get calls all the time that I don't think I can do anything with this guy because he had stents. Well, stents are absolutely insurable. So's a bypass history, so's AFib. Even pacemakers are now insurable. And there was a time they were not. A pacemaker was an instant decline. These days, we can get coverage for that as long as there's not a defibrillator involved. But the timeline is going to be everything here. The underwriters, they want details. They want to know exactly what the diagnosis is. We can't just call them and say, he has an arrhythmia. We need to be able to tell them which arrhythmia he has. They want to know dates. They want to know when it was diagnosed. They're going to want to know when the last cardiology visit was, what testing has been done. Are they compliant with all of their treatment plans? Are they compliant with all their follow-ups? Are they staying up to date on that? If we had a guy that had a stent placed 5 years ago and he's had no follow-up since, he's going to be a decline, or at least a postpone until a full cardiac workup is done. However, if we have that same gentleman and he's seen his cardiologist every year as he's supposed to, all of the testing is favorable, he's compliant with his meds, he's had no symptoms, then these are the cases, these are the ones we can place. These are the favorable cardiac histories that there are absolutely homes for. Not every carrier is going to be a good fit. There are some that are going to see this better than others. And so, again, a wonderful opportunity to shop those up front and make sure we find the right home the first time. Now this is very contradictory to what I said before, but another hard to place category has been diabetes. I know I just got done saying things have gotten easier with diabetes, and in so many ways they have. The carriers have gotten very comfortable with type 2 diabetes as long as that A1C is controlled and there are no complications. And again, as I said before, we've seen improvements. We've seen cases with insulin now being approved at table 2 instead of the table 4, which was kind of par for the course years back. That's really the best you could do with insulin was table 4, but we are seeing improvements there. However, when it comes to the automated underwriting and the instant decisioning, this is where it's gotten a little more difficult, because if there is any indication of any complication ever, then those systems will sometimes kick this out, whereas a fully underwritten product would have taken it no problem. So while I say it's more difficult, I also tell you it doesn't have to be. If we can get ahead of that information and find out from the clients what has occurred in their history, then we can determine up front if this is going to be a good fit for instant decisioning, or if we need to look at a fully underwritten product and deal with the APS and the full medical records. And kind of like with the BMI, it's going to be the method of submission is going to make the difference for your client and how that turns out, and just setting that expectation. And again, I know some clients are going to come to you and they just want the quick and easy, but the quick and easy is not always going to be placeable with every history. So especially if you have someone that has diabetes combined with a cardiac history, or they've had some kind of complications like neuropathy, those are ones that we're going to want to pre-screen and make sure that we do the fully underwritten and stay away from those instant decision models, because those can end in declines. And then you have MIB hits, and then you're starting over with a new carrier, and nobody wants to do that. All right, and one of the last and more difficult to place categories that we have run into here in 2025 was criminal histories. Criminal histories are becoming a lot more visible to underwriters thanks to public record data polls. This was an area that many years ago a person could mark no and likely get away with it if there was a criminal history that was a little older. And that is just not the case anymore. With these background checks that the carriers are doing, we're seeing a lot more declines on criminal histories that are either unadmitted or are older and may not have been known about in previous years. These are not necessarily impossible to place. If we have somebody who's currently incarcerated or they're on probation or parole, those are still unfortunately going to be declines. I know we recently had a case where a guaranteed issue carrier was willing to take an application on someone who was incarcerated. However, in the policy language, it also indicates that they will not pay a claim. There is an exclusion for incarcerated persons. So that really did nobody any good. So yes, incarceration, probation, parole, those are going to be declines. However, once the client is off of probation or parole, there are carriers that will consider these clients, depending on the charges and the amount of time that has passed since the charges. Sometimes we see a 1-year waiting period for more minor offenses, and then we can see anywhere from 5 to 10 to 20 years waiting period if it's a more significant charge. So this is, again, where carrier selection really matters, and getting that full history from the client will be key in finding the right carrier. What they really are going to want to know is what the exact charges were, when they took place, what time has been served, and when any probation or parole ended. And with those details, we can shop this out. We can find who's going to be the most lenient in the situation as it presents itself. All right, so how do we get past these hard to place categories? Well, this is where we run into the triangle of pre-qualifications. With pre-qualifications, this is the single most important framework when it comes to this webinar, when it comes to working with your clients, when it comes to finding the right company. There are 3 things that you really have to get ahead of in order for us to pre-qualify these accurately. First is going to be your medical profile. This is going to be the classic information that we've always asked for in the past, the diagnosis, any medical diagnosis in their history that they're able to recall, medications that they're taking or have taken in recent years. If they were taking, let's say, an anti-anxiety med, but they stopped it last month, it's still important they tell us that, because if they don't, it's going to show up on the report, the prescription history, and then the underwriter is going to come back with a bunch more questions. So anything they can tell us about current and recent medications is always good. The dosages, if there's been any changes, if there have been an increase or a decrease, things like this. Also the timing, when any diagnosis was made, any procedures that have been done related to any of those diagnoses, any follow-ups that have been done, any testing, the outcomes of that testing, their height and weight, and just their lifestyle in general. The key here is to not settle for general answers. ask for exact dates, ask for exact meds. These little details, they can make or break a case. And so the more you can provide on that medical profile, the better. Next is going to be their data profile. Now this gets a little tricky because clients don't know what's in their data profile, but they should have a good idea of what might show up. So ask them again about that prescription history, because that is going to be run by pretty much every carrier in every case and every submission method these days. The MVR, just, what's their driving history? Is there any, have there been any suspensions, any lapses in their driver's license, any revocations, any DUIs, anything at all that they can tell you, even if it's as simple as a speeding ticket. Obviously, one speeding ticket has never made a case before, broken a case before, but multiple speeding tickets can and will. So getting a good idea of what kind of driving history that they have can definitely help as well. MIB, most clients aren't going to know what's on their MIB report. Most clients aren't even going to know what an MIB is. However, if you can at least find out if they've ever had any postponed or declined cases, that can at least start the conversation and get a little idea of what may or may not show up on MIB. And then last but not least, their public and criminal records. I know, again, this can be a touchy subject, but it's important to know these things to make sure that we're not wasting the client's time, you're not wasting your time, and we can shop these up front and get to the right carrier the first time. I've had a lot of cases this year that were instant decisions and were instantly declined for criminal histories. Some of these were still very placeable, but they needed to go to a fully underwritten carrier. The instant decisioning is not always a good option for those. So that is an important thing to get ahead of. Because at the end of the day, if you don't know what the carrier is about to see, then you can't control the outcome. I can't control the outcome. So the more you know up front, the better off everybody is. And then last but not least on the pre-qualifications, that financial need profile. The carriers want financial justification, so they're going to want to know about income, debts, recent bankruptcies, insurable interest where the beneficiaries are concerned. And the reason for the coverage, all that matters. Is it personal? Is it business? All those details, especially on the larger face amounts. That's where they really dig into these. We don't see as many of these things come up on the smaller face amounts, but on the larger face amounts, they want the more details, the better. And when it comes to those bankruptcies, don't shy away from those. They're not going to be an instant decline. It's all going to matter on the entire story that we can tell, the picture that we paint. What chapter bankruptcy was it? Why was it filed? When was it filed? When was it discharged? If it's still active, are payments being made? These things do not necessarily equal decline. It's just a matter of getting into those details, digging into the weeds, and then figuring out if there is a home for them. And if there is, we will find it. All right, so let's take a look at a few case studies and some approvals we were able to get that may have otherwise been declines. The first one we had was a high BMI. As we discussed earlier, those can be problematic. This person had a BMI of 52, which is typically a decline. I think we have one, maybe two carriers that will go up to a 52, but most of them, once you hit that 50 to 52 BMI, it is an auto decline. In this situation, the client had absolutely no comorbidities. There was no sign of diabetes, no prediabetes, no hypertension, cholesterol was fine, no sleep apnea, none of the more common things. And their labs were perfect, better than perfect even. And so we were able to pair that case with a carrier who had the most lenient build program. And after presenting the client and all their other favorable credits, they were able to get approved. Yes, it was highly rated. but they were able to get approved on what most of the carriers would have declined. Our second big one was an active duty military member who had orders to deploy to the UAE. About 99% of the carriers are an instant decline immediately because of the deployment orders and the deployment location. Those two things separate are declines with most of the carriers, but together, I was shocked. We did have one carrier who was willing to consider this. They were able to even consider it in the preferred categories. Now, there are certain restrictions. Sometimes some carriers will look at active duty military based on their rank. Others will look closer at their MOS or what job they're doing in the military. And so sometimes there's limitations on the rate classes, but for this specific carrier and this specific client, we were able to look at the preferred rate classes. There were no restrictions there. We were able to position this with them, and we addressed the deployment right up front, and he was able to get coverage before he left the country. Another tough one that we ran into was a client with bipolar 2 and anxiety taking SSRIs. The combination of the bipolar and the anxiety, having two diagnoses there, that would be an instant decline with most of your instant decision carriers or the fully automated underwriting. But this one, what we were able to show was stability with this client. They were very consistent with their medications. They had been for many years. There have not been any recent episodes. There were no recent medication changes. All the therapy notes were very favorable. This person was functioning very well in society, holding a job, maintaining a household, all these things. And because we were able to gather that detailed history and kind of paint that whole picture and not just um, a couple diagnosis and prescription checks, we were able to really take a holistic approach. And with that, the underwriters did feel comfortable and the case was approved and issued. So that was a good win. Had this gone through instant decisioning, this would have been an instant decline and we would have been starting from scratch. So that was a nice one to get through the system. And then we had a gentleman with a recent DUI. The client was still drinking daily according to their medical records. However, we uncovered that that was not necessarily true. The records just hadn't been updated appropriately by the doctor because the client hadn't told them he quit drinking. He just did. And so it was a situation where we did have to delay submission just a little bit. The client was able to visit with their doctor, make sure that his lifestyle changes were noted within his records. And then the doctor documented that over the next few visits. There were no additional incidents. It was a one-time DUI. The client was a little bit older, which actually played out in their favor. When we have a younger client with a DUI, the underwriters see that as a little riskier. It can become a pattern and they're more likely to be repeat offenders, whereas this older gentleman had zero history and they were able to chalk it up to a one-time bad judgment night. And they were able to make an offer on that. Now, again, we did delay submission until those records were a true picture of what was happening in his life. But we were able to find a carrier that had a little bit more flexibility on their alcohol guidelines, and this client was approved. And it was something that a lot of agents might have just walked away from, but they did not. We did not, and this one found a home. So knowing which carrier leans where, like where their strong suits are at, that's going to be how you place these cases that other agents just kind of throw at the wall and see what sticks. So if we can take the time up front to get that information, shop those out, then we can find the right home that first time and save everybody a whole lot of stress at the end of the day. So when all is said and done, the bottom line is get all the medical details first. Try to have those up front. Don't wait until you already have a decline staring you in the face. The more you know about your client, the better off we're going to be in finding the right fit for them. Ask for those exact prescriptions and dates. Those are going to be a make it or break it detail on some of these cases. Not always, but better to have too much information than not enough is what I always say. And never quote before you understand the risk. Send us your hard cases. Let us find out who's going to be the most favorable. Let us do the digging and find that right fit. And there's nothing worse for a client than being quoted preferred, and then we get the medical history and they're actually table 2, and now you have to resell the case, and that's not fun for you, that's not fun for them. And if we do have to change carriers, then how much time has just been lost. If we can just have that information up front, then we can go the right place the first time. We can set the expectation. The old saying, under promise and over deliver. That's what we like to see. All right, so how can IAMS help you? Well, I've got lots and lots of case studies and lots of resources to help simplify our underwriting. And in an instance where I don't know what the answer is off the top of my head, we can shop any and all of these cases. That is never, ever an issue. And we do have these amazing fact finders out on our website, iamsinc.com. This is a very generic health screening questionnaire. It will just get details on some of the main ailments that we do see. And if you find out, as you have your client fill this out, maybe before your first meeting, you get it back and you see, oh, wow, he had a heart attack last year. This is a good opportunity to then hop on the phone with me, with your sales director, find out what additional details we're going to want or what additional details the underwriter is going to want. And then you can get those details when you do sit down with your client, and we can shop that out. We do also have ailment-specific fact finders out on our website under a NAILBA guide. So if they do have a cancer history or a cardiac history, we can send you a questionnaire that's very specific to that, and then shop those out and make sure we find the right carrier up front. You can send those pre-screens, whether it's a questionnaire or just an email where you jot all the information down. You can send those directly to me at andrea@iamsinc.com. You can also send them to prescreen@iamsinc.com, or you can just hop on the phone, give us a call. You can ask for me, you can talk to your sales director, whoever you're more comfortable with. I'll work side by side with your sales director if you do go to them, and we will figure out which carrier is going to be the best fit there. But whether it be that generic health questionnaire or the more ailment specific ones, those are available again online, or you can call us and we can send those to you. That is never ever an issue there. And as always, follow and like us on Facebook and LinkedIn. And with that, I do thank you for being here. I hope this makes underwriting feel a little less like guessing and more like a strategy and something we can work on together. Thanks and have a great week. Bye.